My mother looked me dead in the eye and said, "This place isn't for losers." I stood up, walked out, and never begged to belong again. The smell of roasted chicken and garlic bread should have felt like a blanket pulled over a long day. Instead, it was a museum exhibit glass between me and the life inside. Candlelight trembled across the polished table, catching on Sophia's diamond studs and the rim of Dad's water glass. Daniel's shirt was crisp, his smile even crisper. I stood in the doorway holding my coat, the gift bag's handles biting into my fingers, as Mom folded her napkin into a perfect square and pronounced a sentence that trimmed me out of the frame. For a heartbeat, I tried to file it under joke like a label I could peel off later. Dad kept chewing as if the fork were a shield. Daniel stared at his plate. Sophia's hand found his like an instruction. Don't move, don't look, don't disrupt the picture. In the kitchen, the marble countertop waited for the gifts I had chosen with a care that now felt naive. A silk scarf the exact emerald of Mom's favorite earrings, and a silver watch engraved for Dad. Thanks for teaching me to fix everything. Fix everything. The irony stung. If there was one thing I never managed to repair, it was the quiet ranking system that had hummed beneath our house for decades. Sundays used to mean pancakes at dawn batter whisked in a blue bowl while Dad hummed old Motown and Mom set places just so. Back then I believed attention was like sunshine. If I stood still and tried hard, it would eventually land on me. When Daniel arrived, the sun seemed to follow him room to room. "Isn't he perfect?" Mom whispered, and the word stuck like a sticker I couldn't peel off my skin. Their cheering became our weather. Daniel's soccer goals drew neighbors to the curb. His spelling bee ribbon earned a cake with his name piped in looping blue. When I made the honor roll, my certificate slid under a pile of unopened mail. I told myself I didn't need applause. I had practical hands, a steady head. But each time they clapped for him, something inside me pressed a nose to the glass and fogged it with wanting. By high school, the lines had hardened. For Daniel's 17th, there was a shiny used Honda in the driveway, red bow and all. For my birthday, a gentle pat and advice to stay responsible. When he stumbled in college, Dad drove 3 hours to negotiate with a professor. When I struggled through trade school with tips and overtime, Mom's verdict was a shrug. You chose that path. I learned to swallow what I couldn't chew. The roof taught me how heavy love can be. I was 21 when the water stain on the hallway ceiling bloomed into a brown galaxy. Dad groaned about estimates for weeks. I saved from the shop, bought shingles and tar paper, climbed the ladder 3 Saturdays in a row, and hammered until my arms ached. When I climbed down, sticky with sweat and grit, waiting for the smallest good job, Mom squinted at the uneven line and laughed. If only Daniel were here, he'd have done it properly. I stood on the lawn with my hammer and a mouthful of silence. The leak didn't return. Neither did the thank you. I kept choosing the small, unphotographed version of love rescues at 2 a.m., wires spliced rent, transferred speeches rehearsed until his sentences fit. My name never appeared in the stories. I was the hand beneath the stage, the beam hidden in the wall. By then, I had learned the choreography. They would spotlight him. I would dim. They would claim we. I would be the quiet eye. So I brought gifts that night like offerings to a temple that never accepted my currency. The scarf was not just silk. It was a translation. I see you. Do you see me? The watch was not just time. It was a question. Did you notice I learned because of you? Even when you didn't look under the kitchen light, the emerald gleamed, the metal shone, and both seemed instantly ridiculous, like flowers left on a doorstep that rejects bouquets. Don't make a scene, Dad murmured, eyes grazing his plate, as if the shame were mine for breaking the silence rather than theirs for building it. Scene. I had always been careful not to star in one, careful to show up in clean boots and a zipped jacket and hands scrubbed of grease that never quite left, careful to keep my voice small enough to fit the room they offered. But something in me had already moved the part that refused to ask again what I had done wrong. I set the bag down. The handles snapped free of my fingers with a soft sound that felt louder than Mom's words. "Doesn't fit," she'd said, eyes flicking to the oil shadow on my sleeve, as if life lived in a shop, disqualified me from sitting near the china. I looked to Daniel for proof I hadn't imagined our childhood, the jokes shared in hallways, the nights I drove across town because his tires were balding and he was scared to be alone on the shoulder. He studied the tablecloth like the answers were printed there. Sophia squeezed his hand. I could almost hear the thought pass between them. Hold the picture. Don't let it blur. Outside, the air knifed my lungs. Snow curled from a sky the color of an old bruise. By the time I reached my truck, my eyes burned in a way I pretended was weather. The house behind me glowed soft light silverware laughter restarting like a song put back on after a brief, awkward skip. I drove home with the gifts on the passenger seat like chaperones for grief. The emerald flashed at red lights. The engraving pressed against my palm when I shifted. In my kitchen, the bag sat on the table like a guest who refused to leave. I cooked eggs because anything more would have been performance. I ate in the quiet that used to feel like punishment. A memory parade unspooled 12 and invisible next to Daniel's ribbon 16 and double shifted for books 21 and sunburned on a roof nobody thanked. Each frame clicked into place until I could see the picture clearly, not the posed one they kept in the living room, but the real one, the daughter who could carry weight without being invited to the meal. I touched the bag and felt not the scarf or the watch, but the foolish hope stitched into both. Maybe this time. The words were always the same. Maybe this time the door will open wider than a sliver. Maybe this time the smile will reach the eyes. Maybe this time love will be something I can earn. I pressed my forehead to the cool cabinet and let the maybes fall like nails into a jar. The snow thickened outside, soft and relentless. I pictured their candles burning lower refills of wine, the humming ease of people certain of their place. In that image, I finally saw the equation I had been solving wrong since childhood. You cannot calculate your worth by the measure of someone else's blindness. The realization wasn't fireworks, it was a pilot light catching a quiet, steady blue. I rinsed my plate, set it to dry, and sat in the chair by the window until the glass fogged with my breath. In the reflection, my face was tired and firm. Maybe I was never meant to be seen there, I thought, hands cupped around the warmth of tea. Maybe I was meant to be seen somewhere that doesn't ask me to disappear first. The scarf and watch haunted me from the countertop for days. Every time I walked past the bag, its handles seemed to whisper, "You still tried. You still believed." I told myself I'd return them, get my money back, erase the evidence of another attempt to earn my way in. But something in me resisted. Returning them would mean pretending I hadn't meant it. And I had meant it every thread, every engraving. I had meant it more than I'd meant anything in years. I started leaving my coat on when I came home, pacing the kitchen like a visitor in my own house. The silence pressed in like insulation. Sometimes I caught myself listening for Daniel's laugh, for Mom calling out for Dad humming as though memory itself might patch the hole. But memory had turned brittle. It snapped when I touched it. The breaking point didn't arrive as a shout or a slammed door. It arrived like rust spreading across metal, quiet, inevitable, corrosive. I was lying awake one night, the clock bleeding past 2 a.m., when I finally admitted the truth: I am not invisible. They just refuse to look. The sentence rattled me. It sounded defiant, rebellious, dangerous. But it was also a relief. Like a sore tooth finally pulled. I remembered the roof again, the laughter at my crooked shingles, and realized that was the night I'd learned silence was safer than defense. I had swallowed it all, mistake after mistake, humiliation after humiliation, hoping that one day the ledger would balance and they'd see me. But ledgers don't balance when the other side refuses to write anything down. I sat up in bed, my hands shaking, and reached for the notebook I usually kept for bills. On the blank page, I started a list, not of what they had done, but of what I had done. The rent I covered, the nights I towed Daniel's car, the groceries I bought when Dad lost his job for a stretch, the weekends spent on ladders and basements patching and wiring. By the time the sun smeared pale light across the blinds, the page was full. I am not a loser. I am the foundation. That morning, I made a decision that scared me with its clarity. I would stop showing up. Stop offering, stop rescuing, stop auditioning for a role I was never meant to get. The idea felt radical, almost cruel. But as I poured coffee into a chipped mug, my hands steady. For the first time in days, I realized it wasn't cruelty. It was survival. The first test came quicker than I expected. 3 nights later, Daniel called. His number flashing on my cracked phone screen still triggered that old reflex pickup, solve, protect. I let it ring once, twice, and then I swiped to answer, already bracing. Vic. His voice was tight. Listen, I'm in a bind. Sophia's parents want us to come upstate this weekend, but my car. No, I said, cutting him off. Silence hummed on the line. What, I can't help you this time, Daniel? His laugh was forced, sharp. Come on, you're always good with this stuff. Just a quick fix. I said no. My voice surprised me. It didn't tremble. It didn't apologize. It stood there like a wall. He exhaled hard. You don't mean that. You're just upset about dinner. Don't punish me for what Mom said. My chest burned. You sat there. You let her say it. Vic, you're being dramatic. Maybe I said, or maybe I'm just done. When I hung up, the silence in the kitchen felt different. Not punishment, not emptiness, just mine. That night, I slid the gift bag into the top of my closet, not because I wanted to forget it, but because I wanted to remember. It wasn't just silk and metal inside. It was the last offering I'd ever place on an altar that didn't see me. The breaking point wasn't fire or explosion. It was the quiet decision to walk a different path, to let their picture-perfect table blur without me, to stop begging for a seat that was never mine. And once I crossed it, I knew there was no going back. The silence after Daniel's phone call didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like space I had never been given, space I had never dared to claim. And in that space, a thought began to take root. If they'll never see me, then I'll build something they can't ignore, and I won't need to show them until I decide. That thought became my secret counterattack. It started years earlier, really long before Mom's insult at the table. Back when I was 22, dead tired after a 12-hour shift at the garage, I heard a podcast humming from a dusty radio in the corner. The host spoke about dividends and compound interest, words that might as well have been another language. But something about the way he said freedom lit a spark. Not applause, not validation. Freedom. The next morning, I drove to the library, grease still under my nails, and checked out a book with a title that sounded almost like a joke, The Simple Path to Wealth. I devoured it in 2 nights, underlining words, until the margins looked like roadmaps. By the time the book was due, I had checked out 5 more. I was broke. Then my savings account held $700, and I lived on ramen 3 nights a week just to scrape together $300 more. But when I pressed the buy button on my first index fund, my hands shook like I was signing a peace treaty with myself. I skipped boots that winter. I packed lunches until I couldn't stand the taste of peanut butter. Every dollar I saved I sent forward in time, like planting seeds in frozen soil. The garage became my sanctuary, not just for fixing cars, but for fixing myself. While coworkers laughed about my cheap habits, I was tracking dividends on scratch paper, running numbers on lunch breaks, teaching myself the language of independence. My paychecks were never large, but they were steady. And steadiness, I realized, beats spectacle every time. By 25, I had opened a second account. By 26, side jobs filled my weekends, late-night tows, brake replacements, and freezing driveways, anything that added $50 or $100 to my investment pile. I didn't buy vacations or new furniture or even real coffee. I bought shares, quietly, steadily. I never told Mom or Dad, not Daniel, not even Maya. The secrecy wasn't shame. It was protection. When I turned 28, I did something that made them laugh out loud. I bought a house. Not a pretty house. A sagging wreck with peeling paint, cracked pipes, and a furnace that hadn't worked in years. Mom shook her head. Why waste money on a dump? Daniel joked that it looked like a junkyard shack. They never offered to help, never asked how I afforded it. They assumed it was another mistake, proof of my smallness. But I rebuilt that house board by board. Every paycheck, every scraped dollar went into repairs. I learned to solder pipes, lay tile, rewire outlets. My evenings smelled of sawdust and sweat. By the time I finished, the house wasn't a mansion, but it was mine. And unlike the roof I'd fixed years ago, no one laughed at the shingles this time because no one was invited to see them. At 30, the numbers I tracked obsessively on lined paper crossed into six figures. At 31, they passed seven. $1.3 million. Me, the loser, the grease monkey. The invisible daughter had quietly built a life more secure than the people who mocked me. I stared at the balance one night in disbelief, my hands trembling, not with fear this time, but with awe. I didn't celebrate with champagne or tell a soul. I made tea in my chipped mug, sat at my kitchen table, and whispered to myself, "This is mine. They can't take it. They don't even know it exists." That was the beauty of my counterattack. While they measured my worth in oil stains and hand-me-down coats, I was building a fortress brick by brick, invisible to their eyes. No dramatic exit, no angry speech, just quiet growth, silent proof, patient power. And yet the unopened gift bag remained in my closet, a reminder of the girl who once begged for a seat at their table. Sometimes I would glance at the emerald silk peeking through the tissue paper and smile bitterly. They thought I was unworthy, disposable. But I was carrying something bigger than their approval. I was carrying freedom. The silence they had forced on me had become my sharpest weapon, and I was ready for the day it cut through their picture-perfect world. It didn't take long for silence to crack. Secrets, no matter how carefully guarded, have a way of leaking through the seams. It happened on a gray morning 5 days after that dinner. I was under the hood of an old pickup in my garage, grease smudging my hands when the crunch of tires on snow jolted me upright. At first, I thought it was a customer, but then I heard voices familiar, sharp-edged too close to memory. When I stepped into the driveway wiping my palms on a rag, they were standing there like ghosts dragged into daylight, Mom with a tin of cranberry muffins clutched like a peace offering, Dad shifting from foot to foot, Daniel stiff with anger. Sophia beside him, her heels sinking into the snow. Victoria. Mom called her tone brittle but bright, as if we hadn't last spoken in barbed wire. "We thought we'd drop by, check in on you." I crossed my arms. Check in after telling me I wasn't welcome at dinner. Her smile faltered. Sophia's eyes flicked toward Daniel, his jaw clenched, and then he stepped forward, voice-tight words already loaded. "You should have told us, Vic." I frowned. "Told you what? That you helped me. That you vouched for me at the shop, that you," his voice cracked, "that you covered for me when I couldn't pay rent." My chest tightened. The secret was out. Sophia's arms folded across her chest. "Evan told me. Said you practically trained him, that without you, he wouldn't have had a career. He also mentioned your investments, that you've been sitting on over $1 million and never said a word." The air thinned brittle with frost and shame. Dad rubbed the back of his neck, his voice softer than I'd heard in years. "We had no idea, sweetheart." I laughed sharp and bitter. "Of course you didn't. You never asked." Daniel's face reddened, humiliation burning in his eyes. "Do you know how humiliated I felt Evan made me look like a fool in front of Sophia, in front of her family? He kept saying how much he admired you. You of all people." He jabbed a finger at me. "Do you know what that does to me?" I blinked at him. "To you, you mean the fact that I worked my ass off in silence makes you feel small." His voice rose shaky with anger. "You could have at least told us. Instead, you let everyone think you're some grease monkey scraping by. You made me look like I was nothing compared to you." Something in me snapped, but it wasn't fury. It was clarity. "I didn't make you look like anything, Daniel. You chose to live on the pedestal they gave you. You let them believe you were the golden boy while I carried the weight underneath." Mom's voice trembled. "Victoria, that's not fair. We only wanted the best for—" I cut her off. "For Daniel. Always Daniel. His games, his grades, his dinners, his moments. And for me, silence. Or worse." Sophia shifted uncomfortably. Dad studied the snow like it might swallow him whole. For once, no one had an easy answer. Then Mom tried again, the muffins trembling in her hands. We didn't realize. That's the problem, I snapped. You never realized because you never looked. The quiet that followed was heavy enough to crush bone. For a moment, even the wind held its breath. I could see their picture-perfect story cracking Daniel. Not as untouchable. Mom not as composed. Dad not as strong. The golden frame they'd always lived inside had split down the middle, and I was the crack they couldn't ignore. But just when I thought silence might settle, Dad cleared his throat. Maybe this could be a chance, he said cautiously. Evan mentioned a business idea, something with auto parts distribution. With your experience and your resources, it could help all of us. There it was. The truth underneath the muffins and the smiles, they hadn't come for me. They had come for what I had built. I stepped back, shaking my head slowly. You came here with a pitch, not an apology. You came here because you want something from me. Daniel's face twisted with anger. You're letting pride get in the way. This could help the whole family. This isn't pride, I said, my voice rising like steel in the cold. This is survival. For once in my life, I'm not going to buy my way into your love. Mom reached out as if to touch my arm, but I pulled back. If you want to rebuild something with me, it won't start with a business deal. It won't start with you deciding I'm useful now that I have money. Daniel's voice broke into a shout. So you'd rather throw away your family than work with us? I looked him in the eyes, steady and unflinching. Family doesn't throw you out of dinner and call you a loser. Family doesn't erase you until you're convenient. You don't get to rewrite history because you're embarrassed now. The air between us buzzed with everything we'd never said. Their picture was shattered, and they were scrambling to tape it back together. But I wasn't theirs to frame anymore. Snowflakes drifted between us, silent and steady, as if the world itself wanted to muffle what was happening. My breath fogged in the air, my pulse thundering louder than Daniel's words. I had waited my whole life for someone in this family to finally say, "We see you, we're proud." But even now, with the truth exposed, all they could see was what I had to give them. Mom stepped closer, her hand trembling as she extended it toward me. "Victoria, honey, we made mistakes. We shouldn't have said what we said. But we're here now, aren't we? Doesn't that mean something?" I stared at her hand, the one I'd reached for as a child, hoping for comfort, for praise, for love. Now it hovered between us like a bargain, not a gift. My throat tightened. "No, Mom, you're not here for me. You're here for what I built. You want my money, my success, my ability to patch the holes in your lives. That's not love. That's desperation." Dad tried his voice rough and low. "It's not like that. We just didn't know." I cut him off with a bitter laugh. "Didn't know you didn't want to know, because knowing would mean admitting you were wrong. Admitting the daughter you called a loser was the one holding this family together while you cheered for someone else," Daniel snapped, stepping forward, fists clenched. "You think you're better than us now, don't you? Just because you've got money in the bank, you think that makes you superior." I matched his stare, my voice sharp as the cold. "No, Daniel. What makes me better is that I didn't need to tear anyone down to rise up. I didn't need to be the golden child. I built my life brick by brick while you basked in applause you never earned. And now you're mad because the truth finally shows." Sophia's face paled. She reached for Daniel's arm, whispering, "Is that true?" He yanked away, glaring at me with eyes that had once begged me for help at 2 a.m. on dark highways. "You're lying," he spat, exaggerating. I barked out a laugh, raw and tired, exaggerating. "Do you want me to pull receipts, bank transfers, towing bills? The nights I crawled out of bed after 12-hour shifts to save your ass, you let them think you did it all on your own while I stayed invisible." Mom's eyes glossed with tears. "We didn't mean to erase you, sweetheart, but you did," I said. My voice cracked, but the words held steady. Over and over. Every birthday, every holiday, every chance you had to say, We're proud of you, you saved for him. And when I finally stop begging, you only show up because you found out I'm not the failure you painted me to be. The silence after that was suffocating. The muffins in Mom's hands trembled. Dad's shoulders slumped. The man who once hummed Motown songs at Sunday breakfast, now unable to look me in the eye. Daniel's chest rose and fell with fury, but behind it, I caught a flicker of something else shame, maybe. Sophia bit her lip. Her face flushed with a discomfort that didn't belong to her, yet wrapped around her anyway. Finally, Dad spoke, his voice so quiet it almost disappeared into the snow. So what happens now? The question settled over us like falling ash. For years, I had twisted myself into knots, begging for a seat at their table. For years, I had mistaken crumbs for meals, silence for safety and visibility for love. And now, in this driveway under a gray sky, I finally had an answer. I turned toward my front door, pushed it open, and let the warm glow of my home spill out into the snow. The light wasn't welcoming. It was a boundary, a line they couldn't cross unless they changed. What happens now, I said, my voice steady, even as my chest ached, is that you leave. And you decide whether you can love me for who I am, not for what I can give you, not for what you want me to be. But you'll make that decision on the other side of this door. Mom's mouth opened and closed. Dad shuffled his boots. Daniel muttered something too low to catch before storming toward the car, Sophia trailing behind. One by one, they left the muffins in the snow, muffled voices fading with the crunch of tires. I closed the door gently, not out of anger, but out of clarity. Inside the scarf and the watch still waited in their bag, silent witnesses to every attempt I'd ever made to belong. But the silence around them felt different now. It wasn't emptiness, it was peace. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for their applause. I wasn't begging for a seat. I had drawn the line and I wasn't crossing it again. It has been almost a year since the night I closed that door. Since then, the seasons have turned snow, melting into spring rains, summer buzzing with heat, autumn laying its quiet gold across my yard. My parents haven't visited again. Daniel tried once, a half-hearted phone call, his voice rehearsed but empty. He asked if I might reconsider helping him with a business idea. I told him no. He hung up without saying goodbye. And just like that, the silence that once felt like exile became freedom. In that quiet, something surprising happened. Space opened. Space for people who actually wanted me, not for what I could give, but for who I am. It started with a message from a girl I knew in trade school. She'd heard whispers about how I built my portfolio and asked if I could explain it to her. I hesitated at first, the old instinct to hide, to stay invisible. But something in me said yes. We met at the community garage. One conversation turned into 5. 5 turned into a weekend workshop. Soon I was standing in front of a group of women with grease on their hands and doubt in their eyes, teaching them the words that once felt like a foreign language to me: dividends, index funds, freedom. Watching their faces light up was a kind of applause I had never tasted at my family's table. Not the hollow cheer of favoritism, but the raw spark of recognition. If she can do it, maybe I can too. Then there was Mrs. Anderson, my elderly neighbor with a sweet tooth and a sharper tongue than anyone I knew. Every week she'd call me over to fix something: a leaky faucet, a jammed window, a stubborn oven door. She always paid me in pie, always told me stories about her late husband. One afternoon as we sipped tea, she leaned across her table and said, "Home isn't where you're born, dear. It's where you're seen." Those words stuck to me like glue. For the first time, I realized she was right. Home wasn't the mahogany table where my mother polished silver and my father polished Daniel's image. Home was here, in a small garage that smelled of grease and possibility in the kitchen, where a neighbor shared pie and wisdom on a porch, where my best friend Maya dropped off coffee and donuts laughing that I worked too hard. Maya, of course, never left my side. She'd pull up in her beat-up Jeep hair, tangled in the wind, holding out 2 cups like offerings. "You working again?" she'd tease, brushing sawdust from my sleeves. We'd sit on the porch watching the apple trees I planted grow taller each season. She never once asked about numbers in my bank account. She only cared if I was happy. And somehow that mattered more than every checkmark of approval I'd chased my whole life. The scarf and the watch still sit in their gift bag on my counter. I thought about throwing them away dozens of times, but I never could. They're not wounds anymore. They're reminders. Proof of the girl who kept trying, who kept showing up even when she was invisible. Proof that I didn't fail, they did. Sometimes I touch the bag and whisper, "Thank you for teaching me." Because without those rejections, I might never have learned the truth. I am not a loser. I never was. Now, when I hear the word family, I don't think of the table that rejected me. I think of Maya's laughter, of Mrs. Anderson's tea, of the young women at my workshops raising their hands with questions and hope. That's family. That's belonging. That's home. And maybe that's why I can finally tell this story. Because the pain doesn't own me anymore. The silence doesn't define me. The echo of that night, "This place isn't for losers," has transformed into something stronger. This place is for me. Have you ever been pushed out of your own family only to find your strength on the other side? If you have, share your story in the comments. I want to hear it. And if you want more stories like this, don't forget to like this video and subscribe. You are not alone. And no matter what they told you, you are not a loser.